and I have a couple of things to send you, Alan, so I will get those recordings to you hopefully this week. It's on my list. Um, but on that note, for people who have questions, we're a relatively small enough group here. I will keep my eye on the chat, but also feel free to just interrupt me in the middle of the conversation if uh, you all have questions or comments or things I've missed or whatever. So that note, let me see if this does what it's supposed to do. Um, what? All right, hang on. Zoom is requesting things. I don't know why. Uh, okay, let's try that again. There. There we go. So can you all see looks like kind of a blue-green screen?
Yes.
Nina? Okay. Awesome. Awesome. Cool. Um, so I had a couple of requests for a sort of introduction to Nina talk, and a couple of times I've done this in the past. I've sort of had a slideshow, but I thought that it might be more beneficial to try and do this just sort of as a walkthrough of the program um, and uh, you know, sort of touch on the things that I think are important and are cool, and we'll get you up and running with it. And then if there are specific questions, we can sort of guide things as we go. Um, for those who are unfamiliar, NINA stands for Nighttime Imaging and Astronomy. It's uh, software program for image capture, control, um, mount control, sequencing, the whole nine yards. So you can run a fully automated imaging session with Nina, and a whole lot more, honestly. It does all kinds of really cool stuff. It's a very powerful program, and it comes at the best price of free. So there are several different control programs out there. I've used most of them. Um, I used to be a big fan of Sequence Generator Pro. I still think it's a fantastic program. But Nina offers a lot of the same performance, if arguably not better performance. Um, and like I say, it's free. A lot of folks who've put in a lot of time on this program to make it do the things that it can do. And so really, really impressive stuff. Um, but uh, the the interface for Nina is um, once you once you learn it, relatively straightforward. Sometimes it's a little bit foreign the first time, especially if you're coming from something else. It's very different than, say, Sequence Generator Pro. And when I migrated from SGP to Nina, I had a little bit of a hard time sort of absorbing what the correct sort of uh, order of operations might be and things like that. But I got there. So um, on the far left side, you have um, sort of your, I guess, what you could think of as your overall various control windows. So selecting any of these things will change this sort of inner panel and the inner options within it. When you launch Nina, this is the screen you'll be met with. Once you set up some equipment, it will save that to a profile, I think automatically. And if it doesn't, I'll show you how to generate one. And so when you launch the program subsequently, it will always come up with a little pop-up window that says, this is, it's basically a profile chooser. So it's a nice way to set up if you've got multiple telescopes or multiple mounts or multiple cameras or any combination of those things. It gives you the ability to have those things quickly accessible to be able to move from one set of equipment to another. Um, so on sort of a nominal setup, you'd kind of run top down on this left-hand side to get yourself set up. But on the initial go, you're going to want to go down to the options page and configure a few things. And then we'll talk about plugins at the end here. But if you select the options page, you'll see now my left hand or inner left hand option menu has changed here. And again, we start at the top and work our way down. And so this gives us a bunch of settings that we can work with. And like I said, here are some profiles that I have set up that are for various cameras and telescope configurations. And when you build an equipment profile, you can name it whatever you want. You also get a nice color scheme choice that you can pick from, which I find particularly useful. You can set up profiles for if you're out in the field versus if you're, say, imaging from home. I have different color preferences if I don't have to worry about red light incursion and things like that for my neighbors. Just ways that I have things set up. I think by default, Nina's background is white with black text or something like that. So what you're seeing here on my screen is what I've configured. But you can uh, set that to your liking. Um, Also worth noting is your site latitude and longitude. You can pull that from Wi-Fi or other sources you may have connected to your computer. Um, it is worth noting that when you connect to your mount driver, Nina will perform a check that your site latitude and longitude matches the site latitude and longitude of your mount, or I should say what you have configured on your mount. And if it does not, it will throw a pop-up asking you to confirm whether or not you want to pull the coordinates from the mount and put them in Nina, or if you want to pull the coordinates from Nina and put them to the mount. But those two figures do need to match. And so that is something to watch out for. And if you know where you're going, you can populate those lat long uh, coordinates ahead of time for the sake of avoiding pop-ups. Um, your equipment tab here lets you set up the things that uh, are specific to your equipment. Camera pixel size, telescope focal length, those sorts of things. Uh, this is important for any plate solving that you're going to do. So you want to make sure you get that right. The Most of the things in the advanced tab, if memory serves, are uh, you can leave as is unless you're using, say, a DSLR and you need to tell it what uh, raw conversion you're using and things like that. But for folks using Astro cameras, just populate your pixel size. Um, and then same situation, make sure you get your focal length in there. Um, there are a couple of other uh, uh, bits you can populate. If you have a filter wheel connected, you can set up what your filter wheel positions are. I don't have my wheel connected at the moment, but this would populate with the names of the filters that I'm using if the wheel is connected. Um, You can use planetarium software if you have, say, the Sky or Stellarium or something along those lines uh, on your system as well. You can connect Nina to your planetarium for having yet another indication of where the telescope is. Um, and then there's some stuff here with Alpaca that if you're playing around with that, admittedly, I haven't done a whole lot with Alpaca, so I'm gonna just scoot right on by that, and you can uh, discover that yourself if you're using Alpaca. Um, and uh, Similarly, we've got some settings for autofocus. If you are using a motor focuser for autofocus, here's where you'll configure the things like your step size, autofocus exposure time, all that kind of stuff, what kind of method you want it to use for autofocus. And we'll come back to this a little bit later. But all of the um, configuration settings you might choose for your autofocus are going to be set here. And if you want to use offsets for your filters, you can configure those in this screen as well. Um, but if you're having autofocus issues, this is where you can play around with um, your various autofocus settings. Um, your step size is going to be determined by things like, you know, how far your motor moves your focuser per step and all that kind of stuff. So, my settings here won't matter to your particular setup per se, but this is where you can make those settings. Similarly, if you're fortunate enough to have a dome, here's where you can configure all of that. Like I say, Nina, extraordinarily powerful, has the capability of running a uh, 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 you know fully automated dome setup as well, and all of those kinds of things. Um, Probably one of the more important tabs in the options box here is going to be under the imaging section. Um, there are a couple of things here that are worth highlighting as important. So the first being on this left-hand side here is your image file path. So this is where it's going to save all of your images as you take them. Um, I cannot, for the life of me, remember what the default choice is. All I remember is I didn't like it because it was somewhere I would have never thought to go looking for it. Um, I tend to organize my data in a particular file structure that I have. Um, and so you can change that simply by hitting, excuse me, the three dots over here, and that'll bring up your file browser to choose whatever it is that you uh, file structure you want. Just below that, you have the file pattern. And this allows you to specify what things get saved to the file name when it gets saved. And this is purely for your own benefit. Whatever it is that you find most important. And fortunately, it gives you a nice little preview here. Um, but these are all of the descriptors and what their associated pattern names are. So you'll see that what I have set up here is image type and then target name, binning with an underscore filter, underscore sensor temp, etc. And that generates this string. So I get, it's a light frame M33 one by one. If M33 is what you were shooting, that's just the example it gives you. Um, but so you have this whole set of things uh, you can choose from. I have mine set up this way because it allows me to see frame number and temperature and all that kind of stuff. And so you know
Thanks
the
about our age.
uh, that's kind of the thing that I choose here. I'm gonna but again, it's kind of a personal preference thing in terms of uh, what you want there. But I do recommend going through and looking at the options and setting it up the way that you want. Um, Questions up to this point? Okay. Um, the other half of this page, also important. Not entirely certain why this exists on this page, but it does, and it's one of those things that I end up searching for most of the time. But all of your meridian flip settings, unless you're using some other plugins and stuff, which we'll come back to, um, are set here as well. So the way that Nina handles the meridian flip is a little bit different than um well, I should clarify that. The way Nina has you configure your meridian flip is a little bit different than some other programs. And they have excellent documentation on their website. If you go to the Nina website and look at the documentation, you can look at all of these settings and you can see kind of what they're talking about. But the way that they have you um, basically make choices here on the meridian flip um, has to do with how far you are willing to let the mount track um, past the meridian before it needs to do a flip. So the this first box minutes after meridian is essentially the minimum time that it needs to cross the meridian. So if you want it to flip right at the meridian, you can just enter a zero there. I have half a minute just to basically allow it to go slightly past so that when it's flipped, it's slightly not right at the meridian, if that makes sense.
Matt, is there any way to set it up before the meridian?
I believe you can put in a negative number here, yes.
Okay.
Um, if you want it to, I take that back. Use the pause before meridian line. So if you want it to not, actually, you might use those in tandem. I'd have to double check that. I'll look into that, Varen. I think because I think you can set a negative number, which will put the meridian flip like initial condition before the meridian. But then if you want to make sure that it doesn't cross the meridian, I think you need that pause before as well. And you kind of set those two things. Because the max minutes after the meridian is basically the how far are you willing to let it go? And so what it'll do is if you're imaging, let's say you're doing 10-minute sub exposures as an example, um, and you're coming up to the meridian and your exposure ends 2 minutes before the meridian would hit, it's going to do a check and say, okay, well, I'm still before the meridian and I'm allowed to go 20 minutes past. So I'm going to start another image. And now we're going to cross over the meridian, right? And we were 2 minutes before. Now we're going to take another 10-minute exposure. So now we're 8 minutes past. And it says, okay, well, I can still go another 20 minutes. I can go 20 minutes beyond. I've got 10 minutes to go, and I've got 12 minutes till I hit that maximum. So it'll run another one. And then when it gets to the end of that next exposure, it'll do the flip. But if I'm doing 20-minute exposures, say, and that first exposure it takes it 1 minute past the meridian, it's going to calculate, okay, I can't do another 20-minute exposure before I hit my limit. So it'll flip you there. Um, but if you, let's say, can't reach the meridian because you have conflict with telescope or with tripod legs or something like that, then you might use the pause before meridian button to let it pause, and then it'll wait a specified period of time based off of these settings up here before it flips again. Um, and so, if you want it to pause 5 minutes before and then it needs to go 5 minutes past, it'll hit that 5 minute before mark, wait, and then wait for 10 minutes until it gets 5 minutes past, and then do the flip kind of thing. Um, you can also ask it to recenter after the flip. This use telescope side of peer should be on for almost everybody. There are a handful of mounts out there that get confused because they use the wrong convention for telescope side of peer. I've not run into that. I just noticed it in their documentation. For most people, leaving that on is good. Um, if you're running an SCT, you probably want to autofocus after the flip because of mirror flop, um, and those sorts of things. So all of your Meridian flip settings are here. And like I say, really good documentation on their website about how to look at the different ways you can configure these minutes before, minutes after um, settings to make sure that you are flipping when you want to. Questions there? Okay. Um, if you want, you can, Nina will annotate your image and things like that when it brings it down. It'll do stretching and things like that if you want it to. And you can play around with all that. Most of that I've left as default myself. If you're using a color camera, you can have it debayer on the fly. All this stuff just takes compute power, um, but you can do it. Um, but because I'm usually asleep anyway, I don't really care what the image looks like. I'm gonna grab it later and process them. So, um, you can also in this window set where it saves various things, in terms of like, uh, the sequence files that you generate and all of that kind of stuff. You can also basically uh, save your layouts and reset them and restore them and all that kind of stuff if you manage to really mess up the configuration and you want to start over. Um, so that's the imaging tab. And then the other one that's really important here is going to be your plate solving tab. For those of you who are unfamiliar with plate solving, if you're new to astrophotography, um, uh, plate solving is essentially the methodology of allowing the camera to take an image, download it, and then letting the program solve the star pattern so that you can determine with great accuracy where you are pointed. Um, and Nina has all kinds of plate solver options available to you. Um, you can choose any of these, um, and by selecting it, it will bring up the appropriate configuration boxes that you need to set up for it to work, most of which are just paths to the executable for it to do its thing. Um, I personally am a huge fan of ASTAP. Um, it is free, it is powerful, it is quick. Um, I used to use PlateSolve 3, or actually PlateSolve 2, I think is what I was using, and then astrometry.net as a backup. Um, astrometry.net is the most robust solver out there. It will solve anything with no information about it. You can upload any astro image to astrometry.net and it will figure out where it is. Um,
You, Matt, do you need to have that API key in there?
you do if you want. So astrometry.net on um, Nina runs over the network. So that is the one thing about astrometry.net here. I do believe you can, yeah, if you want the local version of ANSVR, which is what you're probably used to if you've used, say, Sequence Generator Pro, where you download ANSVR, you need the local plate solver option. Astrometry.net goes to the web, and I do believe you need an API key. which you can get just from going to astrometry.net and asking for one. They just give them out.
Okay.
But if you want to run ANSVR, which is the astrometry.net server, locally, you choose the local plate solver. You have to download the Sigwin ANSVR and then all of the index files, I should say. Which this is a perfectly fine way of doing robust blind solving if you don't have good pointing accuracy. It's just slow. That's the only reason that astrometry.net is um, not my favorite for blind solving, is that it takes a long time, but it will get you there. But ASTAP works both as a plate solver and a blind solver. It can blind solve, and it's pretty darn good most of the time, and it's much, 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 much faster. Um, so I highly recommend using ASTAP for your plate solving. Um, you can configure to use the blind solver for failures. So if it tries to solve and it fails, it'll kick over to the blind solver. I have them both configured for ASTAP, so that just forces ASTAP to blind solve instead. But if you want to, say, use the local solver or something like that, you can change that all around. And these are your plate solving parameters in terms of exposure time and pointing tolerance, rotation tolerance, things like that. I use a manual rotator, so I have my rotation tolerance set pretty high because I don't have the accuracy to spin things myself when it's cold outside to get within a degree or two. So 7 degrees is good enough for me. It's close enough to what I'm trying to do. But if you want, you can set it to whatever level of accuracy you want. Half an arc minute is probably more tolerant than I need to be. I could probably narrow that down a bit. But the plate solving is bang on. So, and the centering.
Hey, Matt, what does ASTAP stand for?
um, Stra- da, 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 da. You have to ask the hard questions.
Where do we get it?
So
Is that
the
fine? Or?
I will put that in the chat here.
Okay.
It is www.hnsky.org. So that is for a staff. Um,
Astronomic stacking program.
yeah. And it actually does a whole bunch of other stuff too, but it's one of those things where you just download the executable and you have to download the database file. When you go to their website, you'll want to scroll down. There's a database using, in fact, in the spirit of attempting to make this. Let's see if I can pull this up here. Sky.org. There we go. Sure. You see my web browser there now. Should be able to. So this is what happens when you pull up the ASTAP page. And if you scroll down, you'll see the various databases that you can download and how they pertain to the field of view of your system. So if you're shooting really wide field stuff, you want the W8 database. If you're doing what most people are doing, which is somewhere in the half to 2 degree range, and your typical exposure time, somewhere along that, I'm using 4 seconds for my plate solving. I can choose from the G5, the D5, the D20, etc., and it tells you, a little bit down here. So, for an example, the G5 is slower than some of this other stuff. But it allows you to pick what database you want. And then that way you can remember. So up here, they also give you some naming stuff of things to use for reference. Um, so, it looks like they kind of want, like the D50 is kind of their recommendation for your large star database installer. If you want the very large one, you can go all the way up to the D80. But so just pay attention to, what kind of configuration you have. For example, if you're shooting really long focal lengths with a really narrow field of view, you want to make sure you're grabbing the D80 because you got to be able to get down to these smaller fields of view for it to work. And Gary, I just saw your note here in the chat. Is there a way to add pattern names? Not to my knowledge. But what you can add is free text. Um, so if I pop back to imaging, you can kind of see that this is done here. So it's, underscore sensor temp C. So the C gets populated next to, because they don't put what the units are of the sensor temp. So you can sort of add some free text to it to make sense, but these are the only things it'll read from the FITS header as far as I'm aware.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So those are sort of your generic setup things, and you're going to want to go through all of that your first time through Nina, just to make sure everything is configured. And you can run tests in ASTAP if you grab a data file of a star field, load that image up and make sure that it runs and all that kind of stuff. All this is doing is calling the program, and populating a handful of factors here. This downsample factor of 2, it's my understanding that is what you want. I think that's in there by default. But that's one setting here that's worth making a note for. Once that is all done, sort of your next step is to connect everything, which is done in the equipment tab here at the top. And like I say, you just sort of start at the top and work your way down. This, like any other program for image capture and or sequencing, is all driven off of driver sets. Nina has a fairly comprehensive set of native drivers, which is pretty cool. So for instance, if I had my camera connected, it would pop up here just because they have a native QHY driver. And they have a native ZWO driver as well. But if you want to use ASCOM, you can do so via the ASCOM driver set. If you're running a Nikon DSLR, here's the Nikon native driver, etc. So, much like anything else for controlling a camera, you're going to plug your camera in, make sure you've got power. You come to the drop down, you select the camera that you're using. It should populate if there's a native driver, or you should have your ASCOM driver available if you are using that. That will illuminate the little gear sprockets, which will allow you to set parameters in the drivers, and then you hit the little power button to connect it. Same situation with the filter wheel. You get your filter wheel control either natively or through ASCOM, gear sprockets to set up, power to connect, etc., all the way down. You can connect a focuser. You can connect a rotator. I use the manual rotator, which is a very cool feature if you don't have a rotator. What it'll do when you set up your framing for your image, it will um, essentially plate solve it and figure out what your rotation is, and then figure out what the rotation is that you want. And it'll pause everything and come up with a little pop-up that says rotate your camera 27 degrees. And so you go out and you choose your little manual rotator, or you spin the camera in the eyepiece holder, or however you're connecting things, spin it your best guess of 27 degrees, and then you run it again and it'll check it again, and it'll check it until you get to within that rotation tolerance that I mentioned earlier on the plate solve screen. Um, so it's a nice way to get things framed if you don't have a way of doing that automatically.
Matt,
Yep.
will that require that you have different flats each time that you rotate the camera?
So technically, yes. There is always the possibility that if there is, say, dust or something like that forward of the rotation point, if you rotate and change the optical configuration relative to those dust motes and they are visible, they will not flat out when you do your flat calibration. In practice, I would say most people don't do that.
I think I shoot
So
with a Newtonian, and so sometimes there's asymmetrical vignetting.
yeah, and so yes, um if you are changing rotation, it, by the book, you should reshoot flats anytime there is an optical path change, in any way, shape, or form, So if you change filters, if you change rotation, if you change, you know, uh, reducer, tele extender, etc., any of those things will change how stuff works. I, I will fully admit that I have used flats that are a year old too, that are roughly the same configuration to quickly process something, and it generally works out okay. But your odds of running into problems increase if you are not taking appropriate flats. So now, me personally, the way I generally shoot is I have one target and I have one rotation angle for that target. So the first time I set up for the target for the sequence that I'm going to run, even if it's multiple nights, I set the rotation angle and then it's set, and that's what I take my flats with. But if you are changing things around, um, frequently, that is where an automated rotator would be ideal, because it'll put things back where they're supposed to be theoretically, fairly accurately. Okay. So yeah, connection, all the same stuff here. Same with your mount. You pick your mount, you get your settings, you hit go. Uh, Guider, Nina will connect directly to several different guiding options out there. Most of you are probably using PhD2. It is the free option and it works very well. If you are paying for something like MetaGuide or SkyGuard, it will also connect to those. Um, the You want the connection for two reasons. One, uh, Nina is really cool in that it grabs the graph that you get from PhD and throws it into the both this page and the imaging page, so you can see it without having to jump back and forth between applications. But more importantly, this is how the guider will communicate with Nina so that you can coordinate like dither and all of that kind of stuff. Um, uh, the um, Again, same situation, settings, uh, and connection. Nina allows for a switch. So if you're using something like a Pegasus power box, which I am, you can control that from Nina, rather than having to run that exclusively. I'll see if I can get it to populate here. I think it's COM6. Let's find out. Oh, that seems wrong. Let's try COM8. Didn't actually test this earlier, so actually, let's do it this way. Let's go with Unity. Theoretically, if I get Unity running, it should populate here. This is what
Hey Matt, I wanted to mention something on the guider thing that was a big help for me. So I don't guide, but you have to have a guider connection to dither.
Yes.
So to do that, if you select direct guide, then the dither commands come into your mount as like pulse guiding, but you don't have to have a guide camera, So if you're using a non-guiding method, but you want a dither, then you use that direct method.
That is a good point. Yes, I had forgotten to mention that. Yeah, if you aren't guiding, you can make it think you are. So yeah, that's a good point. You can select the direct guide right there. See if I can make this do what it's supposed to do once that's running now. There we go. USB switch. That's what I wanted, I think. Or is it the other one? See, I had the audacity to go and update some stuff before I ran this today. And now I'm in my there we go. That's what I wanted. So with the Pegasus switch connected, I get the instrumentation that I get from Unity. Can you guys see my Unity screen here with that up? Is that showing?
Yeah, we can see it.
Good. So this is the dashboard that you get from, say, the Pegasus box, and all of these things that I can get from this. They all get ported into Nina, so I can then also control things like my dew heaters and my various USB connections, all of which I can just do from here again, rather than having to jump over to the Unity platform to make those things. And so Nina does a really nice job of incorporating all of the various components. You can control your flat box from in here, flat panel, if you use one. And again, many options available to you, depending on what you're using. Weather data sources. There are a couple of different options here. You can grab them from you can get API keys for things like Open Weather Map and Weather Underground to connect to various weather stations if you want. If you have an onboard weather observing condition type thing, like I have the Meteo sensor from the Uranus is what it's called, from Pegasus. So I can grab my it'll report things like temperature and dew point, humidity, pressure, sky brightness, all of that kind of stuff. And all of that information is put over into the imaging page as well as into the FITS header when things get saved. So, very cool stuff there. Again, dome control. I don't have one of those. Someday, hopefully. And also safety monitor. You can run environment safety monitors and things like that directly through Nina. I use an outside source using the Lunatico last line of defense, but you can do the same thing here depending on how you set up your sequence accordingly. Questions on the equipment part? Okay, and worth noting, you can step through it one by one like that. Obviously, the first time you do it, you're going to have to. once you have all your stuff in here, because it'll retain it for the uh, profile, when you're on the equipment page, you can come down to hit this little power button, and that'll connect everything. You can just hit that, and it'll just run through and fire everything up. So if you want to do that, that's an option. I tend to be a go piecemeal kind of person, just because that way, if something throws an error, I can just quickly deal with it. But anyway, the option exists. From there, you can do all of your planning in Nina. It is worth noting that if you're going to be going somewhere that you do not have internet connectivity, you should do this before you leave. There are ways to get around that. And it does do a reasonable job, but I think that if you have internet connectivity, that is arguably the most favorable way to do this. So the Sky Atlas part of things will allow you to search for stuff. You can put in dates if you want to plan for future imaging sessions, and you can also if you don't know what you want to take a picture of, you can sort by things like constellation or how bright things are or how big they are and things like that. But just in the spirit of making things kind of simple here, if I wanted to take a look at M42, it goes out, it finds it, and it will show you here the path of the object, how that pertains to astronomical, nautical, and civil twilight, and where it is in altitude currently, and how high it is when it transits. So the vertical dashed line is where things are right now. M42 gets 37 degrees up here. So this is the thing, all of the information for this particular target. So if you find the thing you want, you can do a couple of different things. You can move the mount to it. You can add it directly to your sequence, or the thing that I prefer is to hop over to set for framing assistant. So if you click on that, it'll automatically move you forward to the framing tab. And what it's going to do here is populate the coordinates of the object, and for a specified field of view, which this is just what I already had in here, but you can change that. And it's going to go pull an image of the object. And what it uses for its source is based entirely up here. By default, it uses the NASA Sky Survey, but you can use various other options, including the offline sky map. But that's not quite as nice as being able to see the actual sky data, in my opinion. So what we get returned is an image of the sky here at these coordinates, centered at these coordinates. And what Nina knows is the camera width and height and pixel size and focal length of my setup from my earlier configuration that I did. And so it's taking that information and it's going to draw a box that represents the field of view with my setup. So I can now drag this box around to frame this target as I see fit. I can grab this slider to change the rotation. So if I think, well, maybe it frames better that way, or maybe I want to do a mosaic, I can add panels to my mosaic, change the rotation of that, and I can change how much overlap there is. So this would be a 4-panel mosaic with a 20% overlap. Maybe I don't want 20%. Maybe I want, 40%, something like that. Maybe I'd rather specify by pixels or, whatever the case might be. You can make these kinds of changes to your framing. And so, maybe if I was doing this, I would pick a framing like that, say, I don't know. So this sets up what the image would look like. And now, again, I'm given some options. I can slew and center, which will just take the telescope off to that location. It'll center the object, and uh, and have it ready to go. Or if I want to set up a sequence, which is kind of what we're trying to do here, we can add the target to the sequence. And if we um, uh, hit the little drop down here, we have a couple of other options. If you have a sequence or a target already going, things like that. But we just hit add target to sequence, and it's going to give us two options. So the brilliance, in my opinion, of Nina is in its sequencer. They have what they call their legacy sequencer, which is a very basic set of instructions. And then they have their advanced sequencer, which is really what the default sequencer is now, which allows you to do a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'm going to start with the legacy sequencer just to kind of show you the things, and then we'll jump over to the advanced sequencer because that's where the real power is, in my opinion. Questions so far?
I don't have a question specifically, but I'm gonna have to leave here a little early in about 10 minutes or so. I was wondering where I could get the recording of the video once it's all done.
So it will populate here, and then I've got both last month and this month to send over to Alan, and then it will go to the SAS YouTube channel, I believe. Is that right, Alan?
Oh, perfect.
If
That is correct.
Yeah. So it'll go there. And also feel free to email me if you want, and I can shoot you a copy too.
That's perfect. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, so if we go to the legacy sequencer, it takes a second to do spooling things here, but this is what it'll bring you to. And the nice thing about the legacy sequencer, it's very straightforward. It's just choose your options and hit go. And you literally just step through all of the clickable things to make an image, to make a sequence. So for example, these are the start of the target options. You can have it cool your camera down, unpark your mount, make sure that the meridian flip is on so that it will do that if it goes through it. Now, granted, we're already past the meridian, so we don't really care. But and then we have target end options, have it warm up your camera, park your mount, things like that if you want it to do that. So you make your choices there. You have a couple of sequence mode choices. You can have it loop if you have multiple things for it to do, or you can just have it go one after another, which is what it does by default. And it knows some things about download times, and it will constantly update this figure as it downloads images from your camera, and it uses that in combination with how many frames you've taken to compute what the duration of your sequence will be. All of this information it has pulled from the framing assistant, so we have the framing rotation as well as the coordinates. If you hit this little drop down over here for the target options, these are some things that it can do for in terms of things you can have the sequence start with. So, for instance, you probably want it to slew to the target. You probably want it to center the target. So that's all the plate solving stuff. We'd want it to rotate the target, and we'd want it to turn the guider on. So toggle all that stuff on. If you want it to run autofocus, you can tell it when you want it to run. So, for example, things like on start, maybe you want it to do it if the temperature changes every 1 degree. Um, so, things like that. Maybe change on filter change, or run focus on filter change. Whatever options you find most important here. And so you can set all that stuff up. And then you can choose how you want your sequence to run. So maybe we're going to do, you know, we're going to shoot, let's say, 60-second exposures. So we're going to shoot for an hour. If I had a filter wheel connected, it would give me my options here for the filter choice. These are all going to be light frames that we're running because we have a target. You can have it shoot darks and stuff like that as well. If you want it to dither between frames, you can turn that on. You can tell it how often you want it to dither. And you can set your gain and offsets for your camera as well. It will by default take whatever you have set in your equipment profile. And that's a simple sequence. You have it set up. We're going to have it shoot this many frames. They're going to be this long. You come down to the bottom here. Move my zoom windows out of the way, hopefully here. There we go. You come down to the bottom. You hit the big play button, and off it runs. You can save it. All of that good stuff. And this is kind of how a lot of sequencers run. This is how SGP did for the years that I ran it and all of that kind of stuff. And it's great. It runs everything. This will work. You don't have to go any further than this. However, in my opinion, the thing that really makes Nina cool is its advanced sequencer. And one thing that I like to do is come into the legacy sequencer and set this stuff up that I just did here, and then come down to this little blueprint looking icon. And what this will do is take all of the stuff we just set up and auto throw it into the advanced sequencer with these configuration settings, which makes it, in my opinion, go a little bit faster for sort of a quick setup. So if we hit that, it's going to say, are you sure you want to do this? We can't go back. So once we move it over, we can't move it back again. Okay, cool. We hit yes. And takes a second. At least it does on my infernally slow Astro computer. All right. And here we're met with the advanced sequencer, which basically is a giant script. And it allows you a lot more sort of control over how things run in Nina. So for example, what we have here at the start, we have what we call our global triggers. So this is all that stuff we were setting up in the beginning, things like turning on the meridian flip and cooling the camera to a certain temperature and stuff. The reason we have exclamation points here is because I don't have anything connected. Once everything's connected, all that stuff goes away. And then you can see how everything's kind of nested. We have this sort of larger thing that says sequence, and then we have this little package that says M42, and then within that we have this little package that says target prep instructions. And then below that we have target imaging instructions and then target close instructions. And all of these various things, and then sort of outside of all of that is the parallel instruction set to basically close things up at the end of the day. So what is going to happen is once we have the sequence set up, it will basically step through this like a big script, which is really cool. Right now, it's set up from what we just set up in the legacy sequencer. So we have our target that has its coordinates and its rotation angle. And the uh, uh, for that target, we've got these sort of prep instructions and imaging instructions all within what this what we want for this target. So we don't have any filters for it to actually change to, but then it's going to slew center and rotate. It's going to start the guider and it's going to run autofocus. This was all stuff that we asked it to do in the previous configuration. And then it's going to start imaging and it's going to autofocus after temperature change. It's going to autofocus after filter change. So anything that you have here in these triggers section of any of these little boxes are things that will execute if a particular condition is met. So in this particular case, this is an autofocus after temperature change. It will report to you, okay, we're telling it it needs to do it after every 1 degree. And it's telling us right now the delta is 0 because we don't have anything connected. But as the sequence runs, this number will change. And if it exceeds 1, it will run the autofocus and then it'll reset. Same with the filter change. It will tell us what my last filter was that it was on, and so that I know that when it changes, I can sort of expect when it's going to run again. And so there's information that's being fed to you about what it thinks is happening. And then you can also see, what is running here in terms of, okay, whilst we're imaging, these are the triggers that are going to sit sort of in wait for their conditions to be met. They're going to be waiting whilst the instruction set smart exposure is running. And that smart exposure instruction set is telling us right now we're going to run 60 exposures. They're going to be 60 seconds long, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the stuff we set up in the last page. And it shows us what our progress is. Similarly, once this smart exposure ends, it's going to come down to the next thing to close it. It's going to stop the guider. Once the guider stops, it's going to jump down and it's going to warm the camera, park the scope, all of the closure stuff. So this is all still very, straightforward sequencing, things that we just set up in the last frame in the legacy sequencer. But there's a lot of other cool stuff that you can do. And these are all of the instructions and templates and things like that that you can grab from to do things. One of my favorite, for example, as I do this a lot, are the loop conditions. So sometimes rather than, let's say, I don't want to do the math for how long is my sequence going to run, how much nighttime do I have? I just want to get as much data as I can until the sun comes up. What I can do is come over and grab this loop until sun altitude and drop that into a loop condition for the target image. And what we know is that 0 degrees is going to be sunrise. Civil dawn is when the sun is 6 degrees below the horizon. Nautical dawn is 12 degrees below, and astronomical dawn is 18 degrees below. So depending on whether I'm shooting narrowband or how I care about what time relative to sunrise things change, I might say, okay, well, I want to go until we hit nautical dawn. So when the sun altitude is greater than minus 12 degrees, then it's going to stop the sequence. So right now the sun, and here's where I can tell you the sort of live feed. Right now the sun is 33 degrees below the horizon. It's also telling me that this means if I set it like this, that this will stop at 7:08 a.m. So knowing that now, I can come here and set this to, take 600 of these or, whatever. And it's, I don't care necessarily now at this point about how many exposures I have set. The scope's just going to run until the, uh, the sun reaches this point. I can do the same thing with target altitudes. I can make sure that the target is above 30 degrees, say. So I can have both of those conditions running at the same time. And if we do that, now we know, okay, we've got or sorry, yeah, 5:58 here is when the sun's going to hit that minus 12 degree mark. But we've only got an hour and 41 minutes until this target's going to set. So now I've got some information into how I might want to run maybe a second target after this because I'm still going to have some nighttime available to me. So these are the kinds of things you can do in the advanced sequencer that you just can't do in the simple in the legacy suite sequencer. And there's a whole host of this stuff, and there are tons of YouTube videos which are really great in terms of like understanding what some of these things will do. But a lot of it's self-explanatory in terms of conditioning that gets set and things like that. Questions on the sequencer? Or is it clear as mud?
Man, go ahead. Go ahead, Bruce.
All right, I have maybe this is so basic I didn't see it, but I want to do multiple targets in the same night. How do I do that?
Yeah, so it's not basic. I just didn't attach it, or I didn't go there. So you can add additional targets, and the easy way to do that is if you, in my opinion, is to come back to either the Sky Atlas or the framing menu, depending on how you want to look at it. So let's say we wanted to jump over to M1. I don't know. Just pick something here. And of course, I'm going to crash Nina here while I do this. There we go. Okay. M1 is around here somewhere, theoretically. This is a word choice. Well, I'm just going to pick something else here. For the sake of argument here, we'll take M106. So we can, or we'll take M11 because it jumped. There we go. M106. This is what happens when you're running a Zoom session and a remote desktop at the same time. Let's see if I can get it to calm down. There we go. Set for framing assistant. We'll go with that. So once this populates, then you can come over here to the add target to sequence, and it will add an additional target.
Okay.
And so you can do it one of two ways. You can either, in the legacy sequencer, it'll just make tabs for each of the targets. And you can do that for all of your various targets. So if we come over here, so I think if we go to add target to target list, no, add target to target list. And in this case, so I think we want to grab a deep sky object set. It should just toss it in there. But if you do the sort of quick set it up in the legacy sequencer, if you just grab all of your targets at once, it'll just add a whole bunch of them, and then you can hit the um, make it an advanced sequence, and it'll add individual target sets for all of those things. You can also
Okay.
do it longhand in the sequencer. It's just a little bit tedious, I think, sometimes, but you can do it that way too.
You can also save sets of instructions as sort
Is
of
it,
a macro
is it,
and
okay, I
and
was going to
then
ask that
just
same thing.
drag it in and put a target on top of it and you're done.
Does that come out in some standard file format that you could script in some other tool?
It's a JSON
Okay.
file.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can convert it to just text and do whatever you want with it.
But I just hit that load deep sky target set, and so it has added. So we have M42. It's got the target prep, target imaging, target closure, and then below that we've got M13. So it'll run this till these conditions get met, and then it'll move on to M13. And you can either, if you want to just copy and paste these, or you can go in and add a target prep, et cetera, all from over here if you want to do it all graphically, or as Gary points out, you can you know poke it just by exporting the file. In fact, I think that option's around here somewhere, except I can't see my whole screen, so um I can't remember how to do the sequence export. Do you remember, Gary?
Yeah, it's under templates. You
Templates.
can set up a template that's as
Oh, right.
much or as little of a whole sequence as you want.
Right. And then you just grab that and
You just, yeah.
drag and drop. Yeah. So, um, so yeah, you can run as many targets as you want, and you can set. I have my looping conditions here for horizon things. I can also set timing stuff. For example, I can do a wait for a time span or image for a time span kind of thing, where it will run in a loop until time. That's what I was looking for. Um, so you could say, oops, loop until time. So maybe instead of how long it's above the horizon, maybe what you care about is you just want, an hour and a half on it, regardless of how many frames you get based off of stuff, whatever. We're just gonna, run, for a particular time, or you can, I guess this is looping until a time. There's a duration thing you can do too somewhere along the line. You can have it go till the meridian. You can have it go, et cetera, et cetera. So, loop for time span. That's what I was looking for. So you can change all of these kinds of things around depending on whatever however you want to set up your multiple target run. Um, there's also a clever little thing in here somewhere, if I remember correctly. What am I looking for? I can't remember. I lost my train of thought there, so I'll have to come back to that. But yes, so multiple targets, absolutely not a problem. Other questions?
I don't know if it's at this point or if it happens later. I'm manual focusing.
Mhm.
So how do I do that? Is there an image I look at? How do I see that?
Yeah, so there's a if you want to run the sequence, one of the things you can do, there's a manual focus alarm or something along those lines. Uh Focuser. Um there's a way to throw an alarm in here. It may just be a message, come to think of it, where it'll um basically yell at you to go manually focus. But the um from the sequencer here, if you have it all set up the way you want, you just hit the play button. And when you do that, it will pop you to the imaging tab, which um this is where you would see the image if you wanted to do your manual focus or anything else that may happen. So the imaging tab is sort of your overall like dashboard, if you will, of the whole run. You have information on the left hand side. Well, I should clarify. You can set this up any way you want. You can add any of this stuff up here at the top. You've got tools on the right. You can move things around. All you have to do is grab them and you can change where the window sits. You can tab things, you can move stuff around. So you can change the layout to look however you want it to look. Um,
Yeah, Matt, that's my problem. I get into this thing and I get so confused. I move these little windows around and then they disappear and I forget that there was a window somewhere. And then how do I get back to how it was?
right. So one thing that's nice, so all of the windows that are open exist up here. So for instance, if I accidentally close my rotator window and I need it back, I can come up here. This is my rotator. I tap on it and it'll repopulate it. Uh,
Yeah.
if I manage to make it, any of these that you manage to make it disappear, you can retrieve from there. Similarly, any of your tools for things like plate solving or the image history, any of that kind of stuff, that's all going to be retrievable up here. Um, what's a little less intuitive, um, so you'll see when I pull it out, it becomes this big window, right? And now I've got this big giant window that's in the way. And now I don't know what to do with it, and I can resize it or move it or whatever. But if you grab it and you take it to a various window, you see how this little thing pops up here. So
Hmm.
these are window placement icons. So I can come over here and I can toss it to the left. I can come up here and toss it to the top. If I come to this camera window, I have the options of putting it below, to the left, to the right, above,
Oh,
or
okay.
tab.
I didn't know what those were. All right,
Yeah,
thanks.
yeah. So that's the easiest way to do it. Um, and that will allow it to, theoretically populate the way you want. I've spent many hours probably rearranging this window to be useful in the way that I find it useful. And I often move stuff around while I'm imaging, just because sometimes it's like I don't really care about that right now, and but then I have to go hunt it down to find it again. So, but the way I have mine configured is basically I have all my equipment on the left. And so when stuff's populated or when it's connected, I should say, I have information here. So it'll show me where the mount is. It shows me where the focuser is. It shows me where the rotator is and the camera and all that kind of stuff. What filter is active, all of those kinds of things. I've got the guide graph here at the bottom and the image here at the top. So as an image comes down, it's going to populate in here. I also have a whole bunch of other stuff sitting here for information. So if it's running a plate solve, I would have my plate solving information here. The autofocus, I get an autofocus graph as well as the results. Um, I don't know why I still have my dome tab. I don't, it's wishful thinking, I guess. I Varen, to your point, manual focus targets, if you want to slew the telescope off to something bright to manually focus on, you have uh, star options here under the manual focus uh, 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 option. You can pick a star and hit slew, and off it'll go. It'll go find that object, so you can run your manual focus on something bright.
That manual focus targets, does that come under the plugins? Is that where we find that?
I believe it is in the tools. Yeah, it's this little star up here. So
Okay.
if you turn that off, it goes away. You turn it on, it comes back. Um, on the right-hand side, I've got imaging. So if you want to take a quick image, you can just snap something off the camera here. I've also got things like the statistics and stuff like that for the image. My temperature setting. So this is what a populated tab looks like because I still have my weather
So
thing.
how did you create those tabs? Did you create those tabs?
The little tabs here. So if you grab a window and you hover over it and you go to the center section that's tabbed,
Oh, okay.
it'll create a tab. So I
Okay.
can grab my weather and I can move it up here, and then it's gonna tab up here instead. Um, so you can if you hover over that center thing in release, it will create a tabbed
Okay.
icon. Um, this is what one that's populated looks like. So we have yeah, this is my from that equipment tab on my weather station that's connected and feeding me data. In the imaging tab, I'm seeing the same data over here, just nicely laid out. So, what I'm getting for uh, uh, sky brightness and, all of those sorts of things, um, the temperature, the humidity, the dew point, etc. Um, Also, HFR history, because that's one thing you can use in Nina's autofocus routine to determine whether you want to refocus is whether or not your HFR is increasing. So again, something you can do. And then the sequence over here, it'll show you where it is in the sequence. So if it were, say, in M42 and it were running, these, here are my looping instructions, right, of the time that I have left. These are my triggers, the little lightning bolts, and then it shows and this will just sit here with a little spooling icon showing that it's running. So this is sort of your script, if you will, laid out into its individual component forms. And you can pause and resume the sequence from this tab as well. So this is kind of the hub where everything happens.
Hey Matt, how about for taking flats? Is it pretty good with sequencing flats, and does it also adjust the time automatically for taking flats,
Yeah, so
exposure times?
yeah, that's one of the two remaining little bits over here about Nina. So the first one being the flat wizard, which I love Nina's flat wizard. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. Um, you just come over to the flat wizard and you uh, can set how many flats you want it to take. And if you want it to take dark, uh, equivalent dark flats too. Um, it can control your flat panel if you have it connected that way. Um, if you want to run sky flats, you can have it run off of that as well. Um, it will also, if you're controlling the flat panel through Nina, you can make choices between whether or not it's adjusting exposure or adjusting brightness of the panel. I usually use dynamic exposure personally. And then if the mount is connected, you can just command it to slew to the zenith. That way, it just pops the scope vertical, put your flat panel on it if you don't have a fancy one that closes on its own. And then you have your choice of single or multi-mode. Multi is going to be if you have multiple filters. Single if you're using a color camera. And or if you just want it to do one filter, I suppose. Multi-mode, if you have multiple filters, you just come here and turn the various ones that you care about on. And then basically what you do is you set your minimum and maximum flat exposure, to whatever value you see fit, and where you want it to hit on the histogram. So by default, it'll choose 50%. And then you can give it a tolerance as well. And then you just hit go. And what it'll do is it'll take the shortest exposure you give it here. So in this case, nice 1/1000th of a second. It'll take the shot, and then it will compute based off of the signal what it thinks the exposure time should be. So then it'll adjust to that exposure time, take another shot, and verify. And if it can't get to that 50% mean plus minus 10% based off of its what I have set here or whatever you configure, it'll throw an error that says either things are too bright, or the exposure is not short enough, or the exposure is too long, or whatever. You know, make some adjustments and try again. Otherwise, once it computes it, it'll fire off 30 flats and then you're done, or however many flats you ask it to take. So it'll just do it. And if you're doing multi-mode, it'll just run through all your stuff. I love it. I set my flat panel on the scope. I set it to the brightness that I know that it needs to be for my rig because I've just done enough flats. And then I hit play and walk away, and I come back in a little bit and it's done. And so Flat Wizard, I highly recommend Nina. Even if you don't use it for anything else, it's worth it for that. Because it works really, really, really well. And with the asking it to take your darks, it takes a 2-second, a 2.14-second flat, and you want it to take darks, it'll take an equivalent dark frame of that length too, if you're going to use dark flats or flat darks, sorry, for your calibration.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, I like that.
So that's kind of all of the core functionality, if you will. The other thing that's really cool about Nina, because it's open source and free, and well, I guess the free doesn't matter, it's open source, are all of the available plugins. So these are all these other things that you can add to Nina to do cool things with. They have a little plugin for batten off mask focusing. They have a plugin for the good night system if you're using that. I use this ground station plugin, which allows me to use pushover, which is basically it's kind of like a push messaging system, where if stuff fails in Nina, I get an alert that gets sent to my phone. The One of the things that I really think is probably one of the coolest plugins that Nina has is where did it go? Oh, that's right. It used to be a plugin. Now they've moved it, and I didn't even talk about it in the imaging thing. Is their 3-point polar alignment. This used to be a plugin that you had to get. Now they just have it built in. So the 3-point polar alignment, you basically slew the telescope to a position. This is the way I do it, is I have it set to use current position. But I slew it to somewhere near the meridian and near the celestial equator, turn on the start from current position. And what it's going to do is it's basically going to take an image and plate solve it, move 10 degrees to the east, take an image and plate solve it, move 10 degrees to the east, take an image and plate solve it, and then it will show you your azimuth and altitude error from the pole. And you can make your adjustments in real time because it'll sit there and continue to plate solve. And it's the fastest and easiest way, I think, to polar align. and it's extraordinarily accurate. Um, so uh, I realize now they've got this as a tool up here they didn't used to have because this is clearly built in now, which is really cool. So I highly recommend the 3-point polar alignment. Um, in other plugins, I know a lot of people like Hocus Focus. It does some other really cool stuff for autofocusing. Um, the um, the biggest thing I have had some people I know who've had some trouble with Hocus Focus, but it will do some cool things, including modeling your sensor tilt and curvature and stuff like that. So that's a pretty cool plugin. Um, there's an exoplanet plugin, which is kind of nice if you want to do some work with variable stars or exoplanet light curves and things like that, which is kind of neat. Um, the uh, saw there was a question here. Have I set up Nina to handle an obstructed view so that it can then do the polar alignment? Yeah. So the nice thing about the 3-point polar alignment is you can do it anywhere in the sky. So if you have enough sky to image, you should have enough sky to run the 3-point polar alignment. Just the how much it moves, that 10-degree movement is the default, and that's just what I've always used. But if you don't have 30 degrees available, you can shrink that. um, I imagine there's some minimum it has to move to be able to compute a valid solution. um, but yeah, you don't have to be anywhere near the pole or near you don't have to have any specific visibility. It just has to have a swath of sky to be able to move some distance. So yeah, you can definitely do that. And it's one of the reasons I love the 3-point polar alignment is that um, at least at my old house, I had no visibility to the pole. So I had to do other polar alignment methods, and when this came out, it was fantastic. Um, so there are a ton of these plugins. If you have a specific mount, there are plugins for astrophysics, there are plugins for 10 micron, plugin for ASA. So if you've got specific things, there are some cool things you can do for those particular setups. If you're running Sony cameras, they have a plugin for that. So lots of stuff, and this is constantly getting updated and added to, and um, uh, looks like they have a Discord alert you can get now too, which is kind of cool. So the there's a lot of things that there are a lot of things that are happening with Nina. It's constantly updated. There is a nightly build that comes out fairly frequently. I don't think it's nightly anymore, but they still call it that. So if you want to be on the bleeding edge, you can. They also have a beta version, and then they have just their release version. All of those things, being available, and worth noting too in the general options under advanced settings, you can choose what your auto update uh, source is. So when it checks for updates, you'll get a little notice up here in the right if there's a new version, and you can either update to the nightly version. So like changing there, you can see there's a new version of the nightly build available because I was just on the release build here. And if you want to update, you can, or you can leave it be. But so auto updating can be set there. And then the other thing that's worth noting uh, is the logging is really quite good in Nina. I personally like the debug level. It's pretty verbose. Don't go to trace, that makes a massively large log file. And most of the time you won't need that. But if things are breaking, the debug log is really nice in terms of figuring out exactly what it is that Nina thinks it's trying to do. um, uh, and it's really quite excellent in that regard. So um, yeah, that's kind of the nuts and bolts of it. Um, Questions?
Hey, Matt, on autofocus,
Mhm.
does it require you to take multiple V curves to build it some initial data set, or does it just go right into it that you're aware of?
Yeah, so it'll just run a single V curve. What's very cool is it's pretty smart. And this is one of the things that Hocus Focus improves upon. Um, so let's say you're far enough out of focus that you're sort of, or actually maybe this is a better way to explain it. Let's say when you start the autofocus run, it racks itself out and it takes in exposure and it measures that, and then the next one the stars get smaller, and then after that they just keep getting bigger. So you went through critical focus, but it's basically at the tail end of your curve, right? um the autofocus run will actually stop after about the third or fourth data point because it'll recognize that it's gone through it and it'll back up further. So rather than making you go through a whole run and then kind of going back toward the beginning and then maybe running it again to make sure you got it right, it'll realize, okay, I'm at the end of the curve is here, but it's at the end of my curve. So to get a better fit, I'm gonna run it again. So it does some smart stuff like that that can improve autofocus times and things like that. But in general, the autofocus routine, if you are close to focus, is really quite good. And it will run, as long as it gets a good curve, it'll just run the one time. Um, you have choices of how it fits the curve. So you can use parabolic, you can use hyperbolic, you can use trend lines, whatever you want to generate your V curve. Um, and you also have choices in what it's using for autofocus methodology. It appears their contrast detection is still an experimental thing, though. So I don't know how well that works. I've always just used the HFR. Um, but yeah, it will just run it the one time, assuming that you have a good curve.
Thank you.
Can you explain the cropping in autofocus? It has something like inner crop ratio and what, I'm not sure what that is
Yeah, so
and
I
what stuff
think that
is.
so I think that the crop ratios that's actually new to me. I think that has to do with um essentially if you why would they do inner and outer? Oh, I wonder if they're allowing you to take focus just not so you're cropping off edges and you're cropping out of the center kind of thing, although I don't know why you'd
Yeah.
want to do that.
Well, you want, yeah, that's if you have curvature,
Yeah,
your optimum focus is going to be in the middle, but then statistically, most stars are out of focus.
right.
So your optimum is probably part like a third of the way or halfway out from the center.
Yeah.
And so how do you trick it? What do you do to convince it to look there for the best focus point?
Right. I'm guessing that's probably in their documentation. I have not played with that. That's definitely a default figure that I haven't
Okay.
messed. Um,
Because I know you can the version I was using. I know you could subsample. You could
yeah,
focus on just you know a cropped center region.
right. Yeah, and that's generally a fairly I thought they had that in no, it's not set there. Um, yeah, I'll have to look into that, Bruce. I haven't played around with that because I just run the um
Yeah.
the full frame, but
I do too, but I
uh,
don't. It doesn't. I don't get terribly great results, but my focal length is super long, so my focus has to move a long way. Every step on my focuser is a huge step.
right. Okay, so it says if set to a value less than 1, star detection during autofocus will only use a centered subframe of the total sensor. If unsupported by the camera, stars near the edge will be ignored during star detection. If used in combination with a lower than 1 outer crop ratio, a rectangular sliver of the image between the inner rectangle and the outer rectangle will be used for autofocus.
Oh,
Uh,
maybe that's it.
so yeah, I think that they're um, so if you can essentially the inner crop ratio is to crop down toward the center, and then if you use the outer crop ratio, you're basically just going to grab, you know,
Hmm.
a sliver section in between. Now, I don't know if 0 is the center, so if you essentially want to grab the midpoint, do you take 0.5? That would make sense, I guess. Um, so maybe you
Okay.
do an inner crop of zero point 0.4 and an outer crop of zero point 0.6, and you get the, 20% on either side of the halfway point, or 10% on either side of the halfway point. Oh,
Can you indulge me and go to one of the mount plugins and tell me what extra features they add,
oh sure.
like the AP astrophysics or the one probably people are probably more familiar with.
Yeah, so AP,
It's Dale.
yeah, Dale wrote this one. So you can do deck arc modeling and sky modeling directly here in Nina. And it also allows you to play around with to use direct park locations directly from Nina. Again, I don't really understand. I mean, I just set my park location, and so hitting park works. But I think the whole point is you get to jump through fewer configuration things. But
Oh, so this basically it looks like this starts APCC. It communicates back and forth to it.
exactly, yeah.
All right.
And so you can run this allows you so if I jump over to my sequencer, because I have that tool set in, you can see that I can create a deck arc model in my advanced sequencer. I can create an all sky model in my advanced sequencer. So I can make
Hmm.
that one of the things that happens before anything else happens, right? I could do a deck arc model instruction set before anything else and have it generate that. So it would fire up the camera, then build the deck arc model, then go to the sequence.
Hmm.
Or if I wanted it to do an all sky model, I could have it do that, um, before anything. So rather than having to go into APCC and force the model to build, I can just, um, you know, have it called by Nina
Okay. Yeah.
automatically. And as far as I'm less familiar with some of the other ones, but I think it's similar stuff for 10 micron and uh, it's like George Ilios wrote this one. And I'm not sure about ASA. Uh, again, looks like similar stuff. But yeah, the idea being that I think you get to run it all within Nina. It's all the same behavior, but rather than jumping from my capture program to my APCC to PhD, then back over to the Unity driver, and having to move around all the time, I've just got everything in my Nina command window.
Okay.
There's
I have
something.
a question about the temperature control.
Yeah.
It's set for Celsius. Is there a way to convert that to Fahrenheit?
Not in here as far as I know. I don't believe they let you use imperial units. Let me see though if that is true. Da, 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 da. Nope, 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 no. Maybe an imaging. Advanced settings. No, I think they are only running in metric units. Um, I know like well actually I don't know this. I think this. Well, let's see. Can I configure I don't even know if I can configure into Fahrenheit for my um uh for my sensors on my Pegasus either. It's just I think they're just using Celsius as far as I know. Um, yeah, I, I that's not something I've come across. I don't think you can. Um,
Okay.
yeah, not that I'm aware of. I'll look and see if I can find out about that, but I don't think so.
Okay, thanks for checking.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll ask one more question. Do you know what this situation is on multi-camera support?
Oh,
When mount and multiple cameras, did they ever, because there
I
was discussion of that a few years back, but
yeah, I thought it would. Oh, but I'm trying to remember. I thought I read something about this. What I don't know is if you have to have a separate instance of Nina running or because I know that
people were trying to do it with multiple instances, but somebody has to own the mount,
right.
and the mount has to wait until the last camera is done doing
Mhm.
whatever it's going to do before it moves.
Yeah, yeah. Um, don't know. I know that when you connect the camera, there's no other option that exists to connect another camera. Um, but I don't know where they are on that. I do
Okay.
remember reading about it though. I think that is in the long-term plan, as it were. All right. That's kind of my spiel. Let me get to the